Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Dieker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines.
And I think, Becky, today you have something for us to think about.
Well, it's not very original, Lisa, because it's about how to use podcasts in the classroom.
I love it.
So, I was really thinking about this, and in my mission to expand some of my own thinking this summer, I was struck by, my own listening to podcasts, notably, mostly for comedic or like true crime type things. But I've noticed how I enjoyed that. And I was thinking about teachers, easy to find articles about how to actually integrate. So the article that I read was how to use podcasts in the classroom with Listenwise, which is a specific podcast that's out there. And some of the big ideas from that that I took away, one is listening comprehension and reading comprehension are correlated. So listening to podcasts as a classroom activity can actually be a really engaging strategy that will help not only with listening, but also with reading skills. One of the other things that was pointed out in this particular really light article was that it's also great for English language learners so that they can start to hear more and more and more professionally produced language and be very focused in their listening.
Yeah, I really liked the piece in this article that you shared about equity. That's kind of been a theme we've been talking about. And again, we don't know what we don't know about our students if we don't ask, hey, who would you like to listen to in a podcast? And, again, I'm going to go nerd on you, but, I love like real science or freakonomics. I like those kinds of things because I'm curious. There's a great podcast called, Curiosity. And I love to learn new things. But again, maybe I want to learn more about gender, race, class, culture. Again, asking your kids at any age. I think we often think first graders don't know. We need to tell them. And you and I both think they know completely. The other thing I love about podcasts too is flipping that, even if you don't want to make it public, because we know under FERPA guidelines, all of that, but, letting your kids do their own podcast in their classroom. What was the best thing? We always start with what's the best thing about your summer? Well, maybe it should just be what's a podcast you'd like to make to tell us about your summer, because maybe there wasn't a great thing this summer, or maybe everybody had a different experience. So again, I like the fact of it also being a way, not only for kids to increase their comprehension, but to give them a voice and to hear other people's diverse perspectives and a voice.
Well, now that you mentioned that, in this article specifically talked about the idea of the human voice being really powerful, and that it is actually really different than reading something because it can evoke, the word they use is empathy. And it's this ability to allow students to really think about something from the speaker's point of view while they're hearing the speaker. And I think that's a good connection for a lot of kids. And I think I agree that's a really powerful piece. You can find nonfiction podcasts. You can find podcasts of different lengths based on the age level of your learners and certainly the interest of your learners. One of the things that I thought was a good idea is to consider using, short podcasts. You might listen to them as a whole group and then break into pairs to discuss them. You might have a choice among podcast episodes that different groups listen to, almost like you would do with reading activities, taking almost any reading activity and turning it into a listening activity. And I haven't checked this stat recently, Lisa, but the last time I looked, listening skills are actually the weakest skills of all in American learners. So I think it is a good chance and a good time for us to be a little bit hyper-focused on helping to hone those skills.
Well, I won't go there with my husband. No, it's a good laugh. Rich Dieker will be mad at me for that one, but he deserves a shout out in this podcast. But I'm going to take us a little different direction because I do love podcasts, and I assume everybody's listening to Practical Access. But I do think that that's a good plug for ourselves. But I do think that podcasts can align with course content. But I also think that the trend also is that when kids talk, they learn the deepest. So when you think aloud and you speak through, when you're learning something new, you often do your own self-talk. Okay, so I put my foot here, I put my hand there. Like there's this think aloud that can really make a big difference. But I also think this is a generation that likes to see and hear, unless a kid, of course, has a sensory deficit. So I really love vlogging. And I think this isn't just for kids, but I think this is also for teachers. I think, reminding yourself podcasting, YouTubing, vlogging, all of those things can really kind of take your classroom to the next dimension. And I'll just mention that, I literally have been watching these three people on YouTube that I just think are really interesting. And I'm going to probably, it's Darren Nakakahari. I apologize for the name in advance, but he does some really great tech tips. So again, I don't think podcasting is just for the classroom. I think it's for teachers. My second favorite, I'll just share real quick, is Bond with James. Again, kind of a flip of James Bond, and he does some great things with science. And then there's this great elementary teacher that I just love the title. It's called The Caffeinated Classroom. And she talks about, needing that coffee to get her going. But, whether you're going to do a podcast for your kids, but, model that. Say, look, Mrs. Dieker listened to 3 podcasts last night, or she watched 2 vlogging on YouTube, so that students see it just like we want kids to see us reading. We want them to see us as lifelong learners. And I think that's what school's about. And I think that's the beauty of podcasts or vlogs or YouTube, whatever you might want to look at.
Well, I will end with a couple of recommendations podcast wise. One is the Listenwise podcast from the ones that I was looking at. Really, it's well organized. I don't know. I know there's some free. I don't know if they have a subscription for others, because it is organized in a way that helps you align it really with things in your actual classroom versus coming up with all of that yourself. But I also came across something on a site called Tinkercast, and the podcast is called Wow in the World. And I mentioned this one only because they are much more entertainment focused, more music, more high energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Had a younger feel, but really high energy, and something I think if I were home with some younger kids this summer, I might try listening to something like that with my own kids, just to get a feel for what's out there. And that one's, again, Wow in the World.
Yeah. And I'll end with my 2 favorite that I kind of just think we don't have enough sometimes resources. We think history is about talking and reading a book. And I love this one. It's called Stuff You Missed in History Class. And it's kind of fun because it's got that novelty for the brain again. And then one I know we all struggle with is those teenage years. And I love this one that I probably wouldn't listen to, but I think I would definitely put it as a core piece in my classroom or as a parent. And it's called Adult-ish. And it's by Youth Radio, and it's actually podcasts by youth that are about to be adults. And I love that fact because I think that's often a gap where we're like, what advice do we give? Well, here's a couple of really great teens talking about culture and using storytelling. And I think that's why we like a podcast, because you can tell a story and kind of weave a theme in, which can be very powerful. So we thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, send us a question on our Facebook page at Practical Access, or you can send us a tweet at Access Practical.